It's now time to push on with our 2030 roadmap session. This panel is proudly sponsored by Telstra and will be moderated by NFF CEO Tony Mahar. I'd like to introduce our four speakers, if you could slowly make your way up to the stage. The topic for this panel, as I said, the roadmap for 2030, laid out by the NFF a few years ago. So we're getting 4 years closer now to 2030. Are we living up to our aspirations? 3 years have passed, and since the NFF did outline that bold vision for the future of Australian agriculture, it's been a tricky time, a difficult start, punctuated by drought, floods, bushfires, global uncertainty. Is the $100 billion vision still in reach? That's what our speakers will be discussing today. So as I said, this will be moderated by Tony Mahar. We also have on the panel Dr. Greenville, the Executive Director of ABARES, Fiona Simson, the NFF President, Andy Penn, the outgoing CEO of Telstra, and finally Richard Heath, who is the Executive Director of the think tank, the Australian Farm Institute. Richard is also a Nuffield Scholar and was a farmer at Gunnedah for 20 years until 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome our panel.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Now, we're under a bit of time pressure, people, so we're going to have to keep our answers nice and short and sharp and to the point. We can probably go a little bit beyond yes or no, but we are going to have to be tight. Now, we've talked about our 2030 roadmap a little bit here already, and it has been a difficult start, punctuated, as we've heard a couple of times, between droughts and floods and fires and things like that. The development of the roadmap, Fiona, can you just give us an overview of why did we do it, where are we up to, and why do you think it has been universally embraced? What is it about the roadmap that people have, really latched onto?
Yeah, so why did we do it? So way too often in advocacy land, we're on the receiving end of announcements and policies, and we're having to respond to what government or consumers or anyone else says. What the roadmap was about, first of all, why did we do it? We wanted to get in front of the game. We wanted, as industry, to seize the future. We wanted to make sure that we were in charge of our destiny, and we wanted others then to be able to come on that journey with us, including government. And so that was why we did it. How we did it, with the support of Telstra, Tony, 28, I think, whistle-stop tours, whistle-stop roundtables. We went round Australia, top to bottom, east to west, talked to all sorts of people. We talked to farmers, we talked to stakeholders, government people, people in our supply chain, about what they saw as some of the opportunities and some of the challenges about agriculture in the future. And overwhelmingly, the exciting thing was that it was really positive. So positive. And from there, we emerged with, yes, the headline, which is sort of the attention-grabbing thing, the 100 billion by 2030. But more importantly, I think for every farmer in this room, the 100 billion sounds all very well, but what is going to make them feel that value in 2030? What is going to make every farmer and every part of our supply chain successful? It's all the bits underneath. So the metrics, and that was one of the things that we absolutely made sure was that not only was this going to, be a vision and a bold vision and a plan and a great sort of attention-grabbing document, but also something that could drive us in our advocacy, drive our members, drive our industry into the future, and that's what it's become.
Yep, thanks, Fiona. Andy, can I just pick up on Fiona's point with you? One of the most senior business leaders in Australia, leading a massive company like Telstra across all parts of the country. How do you set visions, and what does it mean for you to actually implement? I mean, not only with your Telstra team, but to Joe and Joanne Farmer across this country. How do you connect up high strategic visions with what happens on the ground?
Well, I think I'd just reinforce a couple of things that Fiona said. I think firstly, having that engagement up front and speaking to the communities and the stakeholders so that you're not just coming out with something top-down which you think is a great idea. I think that's crucially important so that your stakeholders can see in the vision what they have fed back to you. And then I think having the clarity of a very clear goal and a very clear roadmap. Because as you said, Tony, in the time that you've launched that vision, so much has changed. But it's been enduring and it's enabled you to just keep a consistent pathway forward. And I think in business, so often, companies launch something, things change, people change, and it sort of drifts off into the background, and before you know it, it's evolved. And I think the strength of a vision, the strength of a roadmap, the strength of a way forward, and if you can hold that together over time, despite all the sorts of changes that we've faced, then ultimately what you find is people align to it. And I think that really sort of embraces everybody around what you're trying to achieve, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy thereafter.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Jared, come to you next. In terms of what Andy said about aligning with the community and with people on the ground, from an ABARES point of view, Bureau of Agriculture and Research Economics, how do you get the numbers? Can you talk us through what the numbers are looking like in terms of total factor productivity, and how are we moving on that trajectory?
Yeah, so for us, to get the numbers, we really have to go out and speak to farmers and get that data at the source. And so we go out and we try and maintain a long-lasting survey, which we've maintained for a long time, of farm performance. And then when we get all that information about how farms are travelling and tracking and so forth, we bring that back and try and look at what's actually fundamentally changed in the sector, and how are input use changing over time, how's that correspond to output, and go from there. And some of the things that we're really been trying to untangle with that is, well, what are the impacts of climate in that? And how's farm numbers and consolidation playing into all those different factors? And then you can use that to try and identify some of the steps to remove the barriers that exist to achieving a target like 100 billion.
Okay, so given you're probably closer to a lot of the numbers than any of us on this panel, have you got your crystal ball, and how far can we go beyond $80 billion? What's it looking like? We know we've had a couple of good seasons. We know the next drought's probably on its way. What's your crystal ball say?
So crystal ball, forecasting and future gazing's hard, so, we don't always get this 100% right. But, one of the things that we've seen this year with this $81 billion is that underlying growth and productivity that's occurred in the sector, which we haven't seen because climate's been working against us. And that's exploded out in a big number, highest ever production we've ever seen. What we're really expecting over the next 5 years is things to plateau a bit, and as climate works against us, depending on when that the production level, this is the quantity, will likely fall away. The question really is, if we're going to get to $100 billion, is how do we then maximise the value we get out of that production, what we produce? And how do we make sure that we're allocating our farming resources across the sector and different sectors to ensure that gives us the highest return for all those inputs that we put in? Terrific,
thanks, Jared. Richard, coming to you from Australian Farm Institute, you've seen the numbers, you're watching the numbers. What can you see? What do you think is driving the success, and what do we need to be looking for, apart from the environmental conditions? From a research point of view, what do we need to be looking at the research that's being done and then implementing it, which we know there's been some challenges with in the past?
What's driving the success? It helps quite a bit that it's rained. And we shouldn't ignore that. Next time we're in the middle of a rip-roaring drought, NFF needs to bring out another roadmap, because pretty much ever since you've done that, things have started to pick up. But it is more than that. It is more than that it's just rained. It is the fact that the Australian agricultural industry was able to capitalise on those good seasons. The way that the industry was able to scale up immediately to take advantage of the turnaround of the seasons, to capitalise on those good prices, I think gets undersold in terms of that R&D that was there, that was positioning the industry, that was actually keeping everything viable all the way through, so that when the good times came, we were ready to go. We were ready to thrive, as Fiona's talked about.
All right, so we've got the 5 pillars underneath the $100 billion roadmap. I'm going to ask each of you, perhaps starting with you, Andy, because from a business point of view, major business point of view, can you give us one thing that you would see would be a major contributing factor to us, industry, finding that $20 billion? Is it connectivity? Is it the digital uptake? What do you see as the big jump?
Well, I certainly think how you approach digitising supply chain is going to be crucially important. It's interesting, if you look at, just beyond agriculture as well, if you look at pre-COVID to now, we were moving down a path of much more integrated globalisation pre-COVID and the sort of more latest geopolitical instability. And we're now seeing a lot of fragmentation there. I was saying at breakfast this morning, Apple iPhone now has components coming from 40 different countries. That's going to be a problem in the future for Apple to continue to produce that product. And in the same way, we're seeing supply chains being impacted by the geopolitical dynamic that is playing out at the moment. So how you therefore approach supply chain and how you therefore use technology to try and provide resilience and develop resilience in that context, I think is going to be crucially important.
All right, Jared, numbers. What's talked about productivity and the climate change impact, but what do you see? What's the one thing that if we had your crystal ball and magic wand, what would we wave?
So I think it's responding to that variability with climate change. So we know that farm incomes are becoming more variable over time, and we need to, as Richard said, maintain the investments to, I guess, manage those. And making investments while your cash flow is quite variable is difficult. And being able to, I guess, access risk management tools and all those other suite of measures that will help those investments take place will be really important. And we see that starting to occur. So wheat yields in poor conditions have improved twice as much as wheat yields in average conditions. So people are making those investments, but as variability increases, having the capital there to make those investments is going to be a challenge.
All right, Fiona, so we've got a business perspective, we've got a numbers perspective. What do you see from farmer on the ground, from Liverpool Plains, president of the NFF? What's your wish?
So if I could wave a magic wand, Tony, I would actually implement our regionalisation paper. I do think right now, when we think of some of the challenges in our 2030 roadmap, challenges around people, challenges around infrastructure, challenges around connectivity, all of those things are really important. And I was first tempted to say people because I do think not just straight from the workforce conversation, but also implementing people change on my own farm and seeing how that's happening. Attracting people to regional communities, making sure that our regional communities are planned sustainably so that we can deal with some of these other issues around climate and variability, and making sure that we actually have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I think, to actually now plan sustainable regional growth. Now, when you look at some of the issues that our cities have and some of the towns are having right now, they haven't had that opportunity, whereas we do. There's such an enormous, optimism about the regions, but we have to grasp it with both hands. We do need the government, the tiers of government to work together. The process has to be locally driven, but it also has to be overseen by a federal government framework to actually kickstart investment by industry and get some of the issues around a supply chain, local manufacturing, people, all those things happening. So for me, yes, if I was the Prime Minister today or the wannabe Prime Minister, that's what I would do.
Terrific. All right. Richard, we've talked about a lot of time unlocking capital, carbon markets, the structure of ag representation. I don't want to lead the witness, but what do you think?
Thought you were going to let me off the hook on advocacy, Tony, but look, advocacy is incredibly important, and I think it is a challenge for the advocacy organisations that are in this room to be as progressive and as forward-looking as the NFF roadmap is. The NFF roadmap is a positioning document. It is not a defensive document. It is not trying to protect the status that we're at now. It is saying the industry needs to grow, it needs to evolve, it needs to always remain relevant to the community that it is serving. Now, most advocacy organisations, to be honest, are pretty conservative and defensive organisations. That's just the nature of them. That's the nature of the beast. And so there is a real decision to be made and some courage to be taken within a lot of the advocacy organisations if they want to take that step and be as progressive and as forward-looking as the roadmap is.
Terrific, thank you. Now we're going to go back along the panel. Last question, and the question is, your first, Richard. Can we reach the $100 billion, and do you think we'll do it before 2030?
Yes and yes, but we'll go way back down below where we are now before that happens. The variability is inevitable, but we'll get back up to 100.
So that was a yes by 2030 and a yes to 100 billion, but a bit of a dip. Yep. Fiona?
Yes and yes, same as Richard probably, but in terms of the other underlying metrics, they're the key ones, Tony, that we have to keep working on, because yes, it'll be nice and sexy if we get there and we'll have lots of media releases and it'll be very exciting and everybody will be congratulating themselves, but what does it mean for me as a farmer? What does it mean for the farmers out there? It's only if those other things actually get driven as well and achieved as well. So that's my one little rider there.
Okay. Jared?
Yeah, a cautious, approach for me that, we need to get those fundamentals right, as Fiona says, and be, robust. And the key thing is to make the sector, or have the sector enable the sector to achieve, contribute as much as possible to the Australian community, and particularly rural communities. And I think that if we get that, we succeed. And coalesce government and industry to work together, which it's done, and that's a success.
All right. Sounds like a maybe, but thank you. Andy, final word.
Well, I'm a telecommunications guy, so I'm not as deeply into your industry as you are, but I would back you. I mean, I think it's a great vision. The progress that you've made literally in the last sort of 4 years, I think it's amazing. I know there's challenges ahead, but as I say, I'm a technology optimist, and I think with the investments you're making, the policies that are coming through, yeah, I would back you.
Terrific, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're running a little bit behind schedule, so we're going to have to cut this panel just a little bit short. Can you join with me in thanking Andy, Jared, Fiona and Richard?